This episode is brought to you by the Kirtland Partnership Committee. For 30 years, they've been dedicated to supporting, growing, and preserving the Kirtland National Security Complex. They work tirelessly to enhance military readiness, foster community partnerships, improve quality of life, and promote economic development right here in New Mexico. Join their mission to ensure that Kirtland remains a cornerstone of national security and a key provider of quality jobs and investment for all of Greater Albuquerque. Together, we can make a powerful impact. Kirtland Partnership Committee, proudly shaping the future of our national security for 30 years. New Mexico lawmakers' push to overhaul the state's mental health and substance abuse treatment system is creating some unlikely political bedfellows. With more on what that means, I'm joined by the Journal's Capitol Bureau Chief Dan Boyd. And the New Mexico United is one step closer to scoring a stadium here in Albuquerque, thanks in part to the City Council. With the latest details on how that happened, I'm joined by the Journal's City and County Governments reporter Noah Akalabach. It's Wednesday, February 5th, 2025. I'm Gino Gutierrez, and I'll have more on those stories, plus a look at the Journal's other headlines and Albuquerque's weather forecast coming up on the leading news. New Mexico lawmakers' push to overhaul the state's mental health and drug abuse treatment system is creating unlikely political bedfellows and still faces a long road to approval. With more on this legislative package and what it looks to accomplish, I'm now joined by the Journal's Capitol Bureau Chief Dan Boyd, who's reporting from Santa Fe. Dan, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Dan, prior to the session and now 3 weeks into it, we've heard a lot about bipartisan efforts from both Republicans and Democrats looking to reach across the aisle and work with their colleagues. And on this particular issue of behavioral health and substance abuse, New Mexico lawmakers from both parties are collaborating on a legislative package that looks to overhaul the state's fragmented behavioral health system.
Yeah, this is an issue that I think legislators from both parties have gotten frustrated just that they haven't seen a lot of results for the money that's been appropriated in past years. And this is, funding for addressing mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment programs kind of all across the state. So in the Senate, we're seeing a package of 3 bills that sponsored by Democrats and Republicans alike and already moved out of the first committee, moving pretty quickly and so far with pretty broad support. But, also it would be a pretty big change. So still a lot of questions kind of being fleshed out exactly how this would all work.
So still a bit of a ways to go for this legislative package, but let's get into the meat and potatoes of it, Dan. The proposed plan includes a $1 billion trust fund with at least $50 million included annually and introduces regional plans to tailor mental health and substance abuse to local needs. So there's a lot of money looking to be doled out here.
Yeah, so this trust fund, $1 billion kind of grabs your attention, but it would basically be invested and it would spin off money every year that could be used to kind of help pay for these type of behavioral health programs, whether that's kind of crisis treatment centers, mobile unit, new facilities, things like that. We've seen this approach, with trust funds already with kind of early childhood programs, higher education. So they're kind of using that same approach a little bit, given the state's revenue situation and putting aside a lot of the money the state has right now that would help fund these programs into the future.
And Dan, one of the more interesting parts of your story and this legislative package as a whole is they really want the judiciary to have a more expanded role in this field. What does that exactly look like?
Yeah, so the trust fund bill is one of the 3 bills in this package. The other 2 bills would kind of set up a new framework a little bit for how these programs are run. It would require kind of regional plans, so allowing, say Gallup to come up with a little different plan than Albuquerque. And these plans would be kind of overseen by the judicial branch, which up until now, has had some kind of treatment courts and things like that, but hasn't really been a main overseer of the state's behavioral health system. So it would shift some of the responsibility to the judicial branch and provide some funding to handle that new role. But it would obviously still leave some of the Medicaid funding and that kind of oversight more in the executive branch and in the state's healthcare authority.
And despite the broad bipartisan support here, Dan, there's still some concerns over the accountability and implementation of this legislative package, correct?
Yeah, that's one of the big questions. Another big question is whether, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham would support this big kind of structural change. She hasn't really officially weighed in on the bill yet. In one of the bill analysis, the Healthcare Authority does raise some questions or concerns about whether this new approach would work. But yeah, I think a lot of legislators say, they're open to this new idea and supportive, but also want to make sure that there's kind of guardrails in place for making sure the money is spent appropriately and that there's some accountability, too, that if money is squandered or if it's not delivering results, that, the legislature could come back and say, hey, this isn't working, you need to do something else.
And Dan, already going on around New Mexico, independent of this legislative package, are local efforts such as a new triage center in eastern New Mexico that are already in the progress of improving treatment access and reducing the burden on hospitals hospitals and jails, so there's already movement going on around the state to address this issue as well.
Yeah, there are efforts. I mean, I think everyone's aware of some of the issues with homelessness, mental health, recidivism that we're seeing in the state, and try to how to address that. I think there's a general feeling at the Roundhouse that the status quo isn't good enough and that we need to try something different. You mentioned Eastern New Mexico. The Clovis mayor was at the Roundhouse and speaking to a Senate committee about some of the plans for this new crisis triage center that would be kind of a regional facility for folks there. And I think the concern is right now a lot of these people with mental health issues or drug abuse issues are either ending up in jails or in hospitals, and to try to create a little bit of a diversion to get them back on more solid footing.
So we'll keep an eye on this legislative package as it moves through the Roundhouse. For any of our listeners interested in hearing all of the latest news from Santa Fe, you can listen to Dan along with Megan Gleason on our weekly podcast, Rounding Up the Roundhouse, which is your source for all of the latest news from New Mexico's legislature. Dan, thank you so much for joining me.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the shout out.
The New Mexico United are in prime position to score a new stadium, thanks in part to the Albuquerque City Council. With more on that, I'm now joined by Journal reporter Noah Kalabach, who covers city and county governments for the paper. Noah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Gino.
So, Noah, what can you tell us about the stadium funding and the part the City Council played in it?
The City Council, New Mexico United being on their agenda has been kind of a reoccurring thing over the last few years. What happened last night is basically City Council approved the sale of a $30 million revenue bond for the team to build the stadium. And they've told us that that's not going to use taxpayer dollars. I'm sure our longtime readers remember in 2021, New Mexico United was trying to build a stadium downtown, and City Council okayed them to put a bond package on the ballot, and voters rejected it. And so this paves the way for a privately funded stadium. And they also are going to get a 20-year, 75% tax abatement as well.
And Noah, we understand that the City Council approved the sale of this bond, but can you elaborate a little bit for our listeners on how this will not be taxpayer funded?
Sure, yeah. So because voters have rejected a bond that would be taxpayer funded, basically the city sells that bond to the team, and the team has $30 million to build the stadium. Now they do get, like I said, the 75% tax abatement with that.
And Noah, in addition to this bond that has been sold to the United from the city, state funds have also been put into this project as well, correct?
That's right. The team spokesperson told me that about $14 million have been given to this project by the state. And he did say a lot of that money, though, has been used to improve infrastructure around Balloon Fiesta Park and, get it up to speed with having a professional soccer stadium on site.
And Noah, now with this bond secured, it would seem like it would be full speed ahead for the stadium project to move forward, but there's already been legal challenges and opposition to this already.
Yeah, well, there's, since the City Council approved the stadium's location in November of 2023, they have faced land appeals and they've gone to the courts. And so this September one, they're still getting started on that one. So even though the bond has been approved, we got to see what happens in court.
And Noah, legal challenges and opposition aside, the United also had to contend with stadium requirement deadlines from the league they play in, the USL as well, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. The USL requires all of its franchises to have soccer-specific stadiums with a capacity of 5,000 people. They don't have that at the moment. They're playing at the Isotopes Field. But the team's president said last night at City Council that the league has been lenient with them and understanding, and as we saw, they're a step closer to having their own soccer-specific field.
So the funding now secured. Now the next step begins for the New Mexico United on their endeavor to pursue this stadium. Albuquerque Journal City and County Governments reporter Noah Kalabach with the latest. Thanks, Noah.
Thanks for having me, Gino.
If you like hearing all of the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal here on the Leading News, consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal. You can check our show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription and keep up with all the latest news from New Mexico's leading news source. In other headlines from the newsroom, 3 New Mexico state senators have introduced Senate Bill 268, which aims to provide $2.5 million each to the athletic departments of the University of New Mexico and New Mexico State University for name, image, likeness, or NIL payments to student athletes. The bill is part of a broader effort to help these schools stay competitive in college athletics, especially as universities are expected to take on NIL funding responsibilities next year. A unique provision in the bill requires New Mexico State University to hire an athletic director with at least 5 years of NIL policy experience to access the funds. though such an experience is rare given NIL rules have only been in place since 2021. This cause appears to emphasize the bill's intent rather than being a strict requirement. The proposal comes amid concerns about financial commitment to football, which has played a role in conference realignments. State Senator Antonio Mo Maestas noted that a lack of investment in football prevented New Mexico schools from being considered for conference expansions, such as the recent Pac-12 reshuffling. He argued that increased funding could help UNM and NMSU compete at a higher level and boost economic growth in the state. With the state enjoying strong revenue from oil production, lawmakers are showing an interest in supporting athletics. UNM Athletic Director Fernando Lovo expressed optimism about working with legislators, while NMSU declined to comment. The bill is currently part of a broader House Bill 2, which funds the state budget, but its final approval remains uncertain. And a grand jury has indicted Nathan Spiller, a Metropolitan Detention Center officer, for allegedly encouraging an attack on a mentally ill inmate and intimidating another inmate into staying silent about it. The charges stem from a January 15, 2024 incident and include aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, bribery of a witness, and conspiracy. Spiller is accused of allowing and urging inmates to assault Bruce Davis, an inmate with a mental illness, and also another inmate. According to the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office, Spiller did not intervene as Davis was attacked with a broom and sprayed with disinfectant. Reports also indicate that Spiller previously used pepper spray on Davis's genitals, though he was not charged for that act. MDC records show that Spiller, who has been on paid administrative leave since the investigation began, was never booked into jail and was placed on pre-trial release. The case initially resulted in a misdemeanor charge, but a grand jury later determined that 3 felonies had been committed. Video footage provided by an MDC lieutenant and reviewed by BCSO reportedly shows inmates attacking others under Spiller's supervision. One witness stated that Spiller ignored Davis's injuries after the attack and later told another inmate, quote, "Don't say anything about this." Some inmates claim they acted because of racial slurs, but admitted that Spiller instigated the violence. While 3 of Spiller's fellow officers denied knowledge of the attacks, one acknowledged that using pepper spray to threaten an inmate would be inappropriate. The case is now moving into court, but Spiller's attorney has not commented. And in sports news, New Mexico's college football programs are set to welcome a strong group of in-state recruits as the signing period begins. Among the headliners is Highland running back Amari Mumba, a 2,000-yard rusher who will join Eastern New Mexico. Mumba, who was drawn by the Greyhounds' run-heavy offense and Coach Kelly Lee's approach, is eager to make an impact early. Eastern New Mexico is also signing Valley defensive lineman Juan Vigil, Lovington guard Damian Munoz, Artesia's Caden Granham, and Roswell's Jaylon Cloud. Meanwhile, New Mexico Highlands is bringing in a large class, including Cleveland's Juan Munoz, Rio Rancho quarterback J.J. Ariano, and Albuquerque High's Isaac Houlihan. Other key Highland recruits include Centennial's Jordan Lucas and players from Artesia, Powake Valley, and Las Cruces. Meanwhile, Western New Mexico University has focused its recruitment on Cleveland and Rio Rancho high schools, securing tight end John Baca, outside linebacker and defensive end Micah Hoffman, receiver Jace Pitt, and offensive tackle Jack Warble. New Mexico Military Institute is also adding talent, including 3 Roswell High School standouts and several players from Lovington, Centennial, and Rio Rancho. Beyond football, notable signings include La Cueva soccer star Sasha Lucero to the University of Texas at El Paso, and Leah Barron to Embry-Riddle. And Sandia Prep track athlete Camila Chavez has signed with Portland State. The signings mark a significant step for these athletes as they advance to the next level of competition. Now taking a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast. Today you can expect sunny skies with a high near 70, and this evening mostly clear with a low around 32. To keep up with all the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal, you can visit our website at abqjournal.com. For the leading news, I'm Gino Gutierrez.